Alright, hello algebra fans. Today we're going to be solving more linear inequalities, and they're going to be more multi-step, so you're going to have the variables on both sides. But you have to remember what we learned before when you're solving an inequality. Two things. One is if you divide by or multiply by a negative number, you flip around the inequality sign. And the second thing is you have to know how to graph an inequality. That means if the inequality points to the left, you draw an arrow to the left. If it points to the right, you draw it to the right. But you always have to remember the variable has to be on the left-hand side. Okay, so let's just start out with actually kind of a basic problem here. If I give you 5 is less than x, that one is really solved, but it's in the wrong order. So what you need to do is you need to write it as x, and it's pointing to the 5. So when you write the variable, which needs to be on the left-hand side, when you rewrite it, it's actually x is greater than 5. These two are equivalent. They're equal, but this one is not correct as a final answer. It must be x is greater than 5. Because what happens is if you try to graph this one, and I told you the inequality points the same way as the direction, you're going to want to graph it this way. You're going to want to say, oh, it points this way. Okay, this is not correct. You want to graph this one, open dot, and it's going to point that way. That's the correct answer. So if you do all your work and your final answer has the variable on the right hand side, you have to flip it around. And you can flip it around any time as long as you flip around the inequality sign. Again, if it's pointing to the 5 just as it is here, after you flip it around, it's again pointing to the 5. Alright? So now this gets a little tricky because remember I told you if you divide by a negative, the inequality flips around. So let's take a look at this one. 3 is less than negative x. That's not even solved yet. What you want to do is move the variable to the left-hand side because that's where it should be. Don't do anything fancy here. It points to the 3, so when you flip it around, we haven't done any algebra work. We've just flipped it around. And then the second line, it points to the 3. And then you divide by negative 1. And you get x is less than, because you divided by a negative, negative 3. And once again, if I graph this, and just be careful of graphing the negatives, right? It's more negative the more to the left you go. So it's negative 4 and negative 2. It's an open dot, and it points to the left because that one points to the left. All right, so let's try a couple other ones. If you get negative 5 is less than or equal to negative x. Once again, I just want the variable on the correct hand side, so I'm not going to do any algebra, just move things around. And if I don't do any algebra and I'm just moving things around, as you change the location, it still points to the negative 5. So these again are equivalent expressions, and that's what we want to do first, and then you want to solve your problem. So divide by negative 1. X is, switch around the inequality, less than or equal to 5. So let's try another one here. 3 is less than, no, make it negative 3 is less than x. I flip it around, I get x is, again, it's pointing to the negative 3, and I'm actually done with the problem. Okay, I don't need to divide by anything because x is already solved. So let's try another one here. Negative 4 is less than 2x. Flip it around. 2x, it's pointing to the negative 4, so it's going to point to the negative 4. Divide both sides by 2. X is greater than negative 2. Okay, so these are real basic problems, but you have to understand the variable has to be on the left-hand side for your final solution. Okay, so let's try a couple of multi-step problems. Multi-step just means you have variables on both sides, and it's like really solving equations except for those two rules. Flip around if you're dividing or multiplying by a negative number, and being able to graph it. So let's start out. 2x plus 3 is less than or equal to 4x plus 7. So everything is the same as before. Everything. And remember what you do. You always do your distributing, combining like terms, adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing. It's all the same things as before. Nothing new. So sometimes people like to subtract 2x and move it over. But I'm going to almost discourage you from doing that. And the reason I'm going to discourage you from doing that is because what happens is if you would subtract 2x from both sides, it's not like an equation where you can just easily move it over. Now I actually have to move around my inequality and flip the inequality around. So I'm going to recommend to you that you move all your variables on the left, and however the inequality is, less than or equal to, greater than, whatever. I want you, and then your numbers or your constants on the right. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. I get negative 2x plus 3 is less than or equal to 7. And subtract 3 from both sides. You get negative 2x is less than or equal to 4. Divide both sides by negative 2. And once again, you got to remember, when you see divide or multiply by a negative, you have to flip the inequality. So my answer to this problem is x is greater than or equal to negative 2. Pretty basic. Alright, let's try one with some parentheses in here. So 2 parentheses x minus 4 is greater than 5 parentheses x minus 4. So we distribute. That's always what we did before. So 2x minus 8 is greater than 5x minus 20. We subtract 5x from both sides. We get negative 3x minus 8 is greater than negative 20. Add 8 to both sides. Negative 3x is greater than negative 12. And again, here we are dividing by negative 3 or negative. So you flip around the inequality sign. X is less than positive 4. And be careful of signs. A negative over negative is a positive. Alright, so that's a basic one. Let's try another one. 1/2 parenthesis 4x plus 8 is greater than or equal to negative 6x minus 10 plus x. First step, distribute. So 1/2 times 4x. Make sure you multiply that 1/2 times both the terms inside there. Just like we did on the problem before, you have to distribute to every term inside the parentheses. So we get 2x. 1/2 times 4x is 2x. 1/2 times 8 is plus 4 is greater than or equal to negative 5x, because negative 6x plus x is negative 5x, minus 10. And then it's like normal, solving. So we're going to add 5x to both sides. We get 7x plus 4 is greater than or equal to negative 10. Subtract 4 from both sides. 7x is greater than or equal to negative 14. And once again, be careful. I am not dividing by a negative. This 14 happens to be negative, but I am not dividing by a negative. So my inequality does not change. X is greater than or equal to negative 2. And just to graph this last one here, negative 2. Make sure it's more negative on the left, and goes up here on the right, and it says fill dot, and it points that way. That's your answer. Alright, so those are just some examples. Remember the rule. Flip the inequality sign if you are multiplying or dividing. Basically, the very last step is when you would flip the inequality sign, because that's the time then you actually do your multiplying and dividing, is the very last step. If you want to move the variable around and you want to flip the whole equation around, make sure the